So it's Rich here. Rob is here as well, and we've been joined by Shaun Harvey, the former CEO of the English Football League and currently non-exec director at Wrexham Football Club. Thanks very much for joining us, Shaun. I was saying to Rob before that it feels to me like we are at quite a significant moment in football. I mean, you've seen it an awful lot during your career. Does this feel like a time that we are seeing a lot of significant change in terms of ownership, in terms of football as entertainment? Do you get the sense that this is a really significant time for the sport?
Yeah, and I'm delighted. Rich, I'm delighted to be here. Yes, I do. The answer, in short, the answer is yes, I do. I mean, football's continually evolving, and it changes day on day, year on year. It really does, however, sort of feel that some big changes are shortly to arrive. This can be attributed to many different things. But ultimately, the appointment of an independent regulator will generally have to change in certain areas how the football business operates and manages itself, if indeed it is allowed to continue to manage itself. And, subsequently that will then, hopefully saw a distribution of wealth across the football pyramid that meets the requirements of those that are charged with the responsibility of negotiating it, and then ultimately, when more new money comes in from central sources to EFL clubs in particular, that's what usually starts a cavalcade of potential club sales and new owners coming in to take advantage of that new revenue. So, yeah, in short, football always evolves, but yes, it does feel like we are at a crossroads of a significant change.
Sorry,
Go on, Rich. You go. You
no,
go.
I was going to say, in terms of the independent regulator, Shaun, would this have been something that you'd like to have seen introduced?
No, listen, I'm fairly and squarely in the camp that ultimately football should govern itself. It shouldn't really need an external regulator. I mean, ultimately the FA are the governing body of football in this country, and ultimately there's no reason why they shouldn't or couldn't have been able to do the job that's now being sort of given by government to the regulator. It would have been a far better fit if the FA had been put in that position to do it, simply because that's the structure that already exists. And ultimately the FA need to look at themselves as an organisation generally over many years, not just the current incumbents, as to why government didn't feel that they were able to fulfil that role as a governing body in a way that was in the best interest of football.
That takes me back, Shaun. I remember putting a submission in under the DCMS review. We did a Sheffield group. It was led by Richard Caborn. And the outcome of that report was actually we have an independent regulator. It's called the Football Association. And if you did a fairly heavy lift on the structure and governance of the FA, you would be in a much better position for taking the game forward in a much quicker way as well, actually, because we've now got bill after bill after bill that's got to go through Parliament.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're imposing something into a structure that already exists in reality, but that structure's not delivered the outcome and the results that everybody desires. In reality, it is not just the fault of the FA. They have a part to play, and a significant part, but ultimately the EFL and the Premier League as the competitions for many years have tried to make sure that the FA's influence into each of our own affairs was limited as possible. I mean, there's no real logic that answers why the owners and directors test, or its predecessor, the fit and proper persons test, ultimately couldn't have been done by the FA. The reason it wasn't is that both the EFL and the Premier League wanted to ensure that they kept control of this area to look after the benefits of their member clubs. So ultimately, there's any number of areas that potentially should have been done and undertaken away from the EFL or the Premier League, but never were, on the basis that the instructions and directive from the clubs was to ensure that their interests were protected from inside the competition.
Yeah, that's a fair shout. Can I just take you back to the point you raised about fairer distribution? Because I think that, for me, that's coming through a lot of the narratives at the moment, particularly when you speak to, I guess, fans as stakeholders. They keep saying we want a fairer distribution. Where do you stand on that? What is fairness in that distribution model?
And Rob, the genuine answer is it's in the eye of the beholder at any one time.
Yeah, yeah.
There's the famous story going back to the creation of the Premier League. Where the Premier League allegedly offered the Football League, as it was then, the EFL as it is now, 25% of any revenue on the basis that the rights were shared collectively. I negotiated the last solidarity deal on behalf of the EFL with the Premier League. That again was done at a time where we were looking to create some additional money, but of course it was done because the Premier League at that time needed to bring some regularisation to financial control measures between the Premier League and the Championship. And in fairness, so draconian were the current approach, that approach in the EFL at the time about trying to get losses down to 5 and 6 million, that ultimately the Premier League did have to come to the table and negotiate against that position. Otherwise, the clubs that were getting relegated had absolutely no chance of complying. So, on that basis, we got to a position where the Premier League and the Championship regulations were more aligned to facilitate the promotion and relegation. But ultimately, the benefit was generally to other clubs of income linked to parachute payments going forward. So that made us, I remember at the time it was heralded as a really significant step, a good day for football, a good day for distribution. Yet it shows how things change, because that exact same distribution is now the one that says this creates the cliff edge, doesn't deal with the issues that football is facing now, and we want more. So what is a fair return? A fair return is whatever ultimately is able to be negotiated for the benefit of the clubs in the EFL and below from the Premier League riches.
Yeah, fair point.
Yeah, I mean, me and Rob talk a lot about competitive balance, and Wrexham are now going to move into the Championship, where you've got a lot of those clubs in the Championship already are in receipt of parachute payments. We're seeing more and more, probably more than we've seen for the past decade, that the bottom three from the Premier League, generally the top three in the Championship next season. There is massive inequality, isn't there, in terms of finance as a result of the parachute payments and as a result of clubs, having those payments spread over 3 years. Are you in favour of parachute payments continuing, or would you like to see them scrapped altogether?
I mean, competitive balance is key, ultimately, because what we all need to be, the product on the pitch has to be competitive. If you turn up on a Saturday and you're virtually certain to know what the result is, by virtue of the strength of both sides, then it's not going to be long before the very wealth we're talking about wanting to be distributed more equally is actually going to be going down overall, which means the EFL club share is going to go down because it's not got the same appeal to the audience. So it's really important that we keep competitive balance in the front of our minds. Yet, of course, competitive balance then contradicts financial control measures, because if you want competitive balance and you accept there's parachute payments coming down, and we'll get onto what parachute payments really should be for in a second. But if you take it and that money is coming down, then limit the money that the other clubs can spend in the Championship, how would you maintain competitive balance?
Yeah.
And so actually the desire from clubs in the EFL to manage their losses is actually working against the competitive balance argument if it was a free market. So the natural focus then, if everybody's in the position where they want to limit losses, and it's a very sensible move forward, is the parachute payments are then too big? Well, actually, the parachute payments potentially aren't too big. What the parachute payments are not being used for the purpose for which they were originally incorporated and intended. Because a parachute payment was to allow a club to be able to spend in the Premier League and not then go bust if it was relegated. So effectively, it was to cover the costs incurred whilst being a Premier League club. What they weren't there to do was to give you a fighting fund to get yourself back promoted again.
Yeah.
When I went to Leeds in 2004, the first year the club had been relegated from the Premier League, and I went 6 weeks after they got relegated. It was a summer of a fire sale. Every player who was on big wages had to go. But surely that's what should happen if you get relegated. You should have to dispose of the playing assets that you had that you could no longer afford to keep. And that allows the younger players that have benefited from that experience in the Premier League to come back through. I mean, it's simplistic, and it's not quite as simple as that, but the logic must stand true. But such are the size of the parachute payments now. Effectively, they just underwrite a season with the Premier League squad in the Championship.
Yeah.
And you look at everybody scoffed at Mike Ashley when he said, "I'm not going to sell any of my players on relegation unless I get full value for them." And he sold the ones he got full value for, and he kept the others, and they got promoted straight back. He was the first one that demonstrated you could actually utilise the parachute payment to run your football, a Premier League club in the Championship for at least 1 year.
Yeah.
And that's what you see now on a regular basis. Everybody's following that model. You get full value. So not only do you get the comfort of the safety net of a parachute payment, but that gives you the ability to sell your players at full value and then reinvest that money to make the competitive balance even worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my big issue with them, Shaun. And when you look at the data on that, that's exactly what is happening, isn't it? And to go back to that point, the non-competitive balance, it's pulling away that group of clubs from everybody else, and therefore either artificially raising a transfer fee ceiling within the Championship that some can't get to, or certainly inflating wages. Which, and it may be utopia.
Rob, just one other thing on now. I mean, I remember the conversations at the EFL when we were talking about parachute payments, and I led the executives campaign at the EFL about getting them reduced from 4 years back to 2 years, because there was absolutely no justification for a fourth year. And of course, as most of these discussions go, you end up in a compromise position where it's 2 years if you go straight back up and down, but 3 years if you spend more than a year there. And there's a logic to that, actually, the additional year, because the players that you get promoted with, you stay on the same contracts, usually with some form of Premier League inflation clause. Yeah. And then if you get relegated, come back to the level. After 2 years, some of the players that you've got promoted with obviously then genuinely believe that they're Premier League players for time going forward. And of course, relegation clauses aren't as then in common, and the new players that have come in to strengthen the side to keep them in the Premier League don't usually want to entertain relegation clauses, and that's where we go. My answer is simple to say and discuss, but harder to put in place. If there were mandatory relegation percentage clauses in players' contracts from the Premier League to the Championship, from the Championship to League One to League Two, and for this League Two to the National League, with probably similar increases going the other way, you don't need parachute payments in the quantum that you've got now, because actually you'd be taking out the very expenditure that those parachute payments are supposed to cover. If the clubs don't have that to do, they don't need as much money. There's more money to distribute to the other clubs, and the competitive balance is very much reduced. One challenge, of course, it sounds very logical. Why wouldn't it work? We do have the players have a trade union who looks after their interests, and why should they be the ones as employees that suffer? Football's matter to discuss, because if we can find an answer to that one, ultimately a lot of the other issues fall away.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And it sounds simplistic in nature, but actually, to be really pragmatic, it is the outcome that I think is the most sensible. And if players need to take a haircut, I think players take a haircut on it. They accept the good times as well as the bad, and they can't have it. Can't have it always.
If you run a normal business and your turnover
Yeah.
halves, that the company's got to reevaluate itself. It does. In the traditional world, it ends up being in redundancies and salary cuts. But we've got a protected set of employees here who ultimately can continue to claim exactly the same amount of money.
Yeah. How strong do the clubs need to be, do you think, in that context? And it sounds really flippant, and you've been there and done it as a CEO. How difficult is it for a club just to simply say no to a player when they come and try and do the negotiation?
Difficult. I mean, it's if you get that wonderful tap on your shoulder from the manager that says that's the one that'll make all the difference.
Mm-hmm.
I'm of a firm belief that no football club's ever signed a player that it couldn't afford for that season.
Mm-hmm.
I'm convinced that I'm more than happy that every club can afford the player. That what they can't necessarily do is afford it going forward, because either they've not got certainty of income or it's or they get relegated. So it's difficult, and fans have got a part to play in this as well, because the expectations and clamour of fans to sign new and what are perceived to be better players effectively does drive clubs to arguably spending more than they would have done by choice. Now, that's not saying it's the fans' fault. It's just a factor that ultimately, the fan is the customer of the club. They're the ones that go through the turnstiles. They're the ones that pay the money, and the board have to do something to engage their fan base.
Mm.
If engaging their fan base is by signing players on longer contracts than ideally they'd want at more money than what they'd want, then unless it works, it's a gamble.
Yeah. Well,
people point to clubs like Crewe and other being really well run clubs financially from a model. But that's aided and abetted by a fan base that's got an expectation of knowing that their ambition, they want to make sure they can see football week on week, year on year, decade on decade at their football club, rather than why are we not playing in the Champions League?
Yeah. Well, we spoke to a former MD of a Premier League club last week. He said that football is unlike any other business in that the customer base rate you on how much money your owner is putting in, that the club itself isn't generating. It's coming from that owner, and if you do that, you're seen as being a good owner. And if you're there not spending money you haven't got, you're seen as being a bad owner, which is completely just wouldn't happen in the real world, would it?
It's completely illogical, but it's what drives the industry forward. I mean, some of the best run football clubs are still loss making.
Yeah.
The reality is that the equity value in that club is probably increasing a lot quicker than the losses that have been the cumulative losses, and on disposal, the owners will make a profit. So actually, a balance sheet isn't always the right measure of a success of a football club, but it goes along. But Richard, you're right. Ultimately, until such time as the fan base lose faith with the people that are losing money on a regular basis, thinking that money could have been lost better, then you're all right.
Yeah.
And as soon as they think that either you're not going to be able to do it anymore, or there's going to be more of the same, they need the next cab on the rank to lose probably more money to be able to go forward.
Yeah. And it's part of the magic of English football, isn't it? And part of the reason why English football is so attractive to foreign investors is that you've got this depth of a football league pyramid that no other country in the world has. Yeah. Are you still surprised that we don't have more Bury FCs? That we haven't had more Bury FCs in the past? Would you expect?
No. I mean, and I don't think Bury ultimately is the best example. But the depth of football in the UK, because obviously, as my Welsh friends keep reminding me, it does involve Wales as well. Can't keep saying England. In England and Wales, I mean, it's its absolute strength. And add the 24 teams in from the National League, and the reality is now, if my maths is right, you've got 116 professional clubs.
Yeah.
And some below that aspire to get into the system as quickly as possible. And what the Wrexham experience has shown a lot of people is that you can start at the bottom. Except Wrexham wasn't right at the bottom, but in the National League for this purpose, and have a chance of making it all the way to the top. That's a magic that doesn't exist in certainly North American sport. But I think the general point on this is that it's not football clubs that usually go bust; it's their owners. A football club traditionally finds a way to survive and actually keep going. It might change its appearance, but generally the football clubs continue. It's the owners that don't.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, what have you taken from your experience of working at Wrexham, Shaun? I mean, it's been a story that's grabbed the imagination, not just in England and Wales, and probably Scotland, Northern Ireland as well, but across the world.
Yeah, and it's been a fantastic journey, and it's it was born out of ultimately Rob McElhenney seeing Sunderland Till I Die and falling in love with Rob's a massive sports fan first and foremost, but falling in love with this principle of promotion and relegation. Well, he didn't fall in love with the principle of promotion and relegation. He fell in love with the principle that you could take a team from the bottom to the top.
Yeah.
That was the bit that excited him, and as we know, that's facilitated by promotion and relegation. But the other magic was the impact that the football club has on its community, and what does it mean to its community. And because we have so many, it's not like American sport where there's 28 teams in the NFL, or 32 teams, whatever the right number is, that cover. I think it's 32 that covers the whole of the country. We've got 92 in a much smaller area. So everybody has their own.
Yeah.
So, that means the football club has such a more meaningful and significant impact on the community from which it takes its name. And, being able to energise and improve a community through the fortunes of its premier sports team, the football club in Wrexham's case, was just something that they fell in love with. I mean, it's philanthropy in any other form, apart from the beneficiaries are the community that support the football club, rather than a hospice or a hospital or a library. And I think the magic now, and I suspect this, and I genuinely believe this is why we're seeing more US-based owners coming into football in the UK. Is that the price of entry is still relatively small. It's far too much for me and probably the majority. But if you're a successful business person in the US, you've probably got enough money to be able to buy and operate a lower league football club. So rather than buying, the example I use is rather than buying a picture to hang on the local, the wall of the local museum that everybody wanders past and says, "Well, that's nice," and there's a feel-good factor because actually swap the picture for a football club, which is a living, breathing organisation that really can deliver benefits to a community, and the individuals who then own it gain a status in that community that they've probably never enjoyed or witnessed anywhere else before.
Yeah.
And it actually gives these very successful people something else over and above, traipsing into the office, making another fortune from another different trade. Actually, they can get involved in something that has real sort of social meaning And that, I think, has been attractive to so many owners. And that's why we're seeing more family-based organisations buying football clubs than necessarily, they're being bought from the proceeds of venture capitalism and private equity rather than by venture capitalists or private equity funds. It's the proceeds thereof, and that's what keeps money coming. That's what's going to keep money coming into football for a long time, for years to come.
Yeah, and
I really like that analysis, Sean. I think, and it often gets missed, doesn't it? That the interconnectivity between the club and its community base. So if you take the guys at Wrexham, they will have global fanfares, particularly Ryan when he's dressed up as Deadpool or whatever other Hollywood movie he's in, and they will have those fans on the streets, and they'll do the launch of the film in the cinema, and they'll have the people queuing up, trying to get a photo and a selfie and all the rest of it. But it's quite a transactional relationship, isn't it? I've seen this person acting on screen. I really like this person. But to just extend your analysis there on that philanthropic ideal.
You're from Yorkshire. You're from Yorkshire as well, aren't you? I can never see it.
But you're beginning to have a tangible material impact on the lives of people in that community, aren't you? So you can put the plaque up on the outside of the museum, or you can buy a professional football club that will actually get somebody out of bed on a Saturday morning to go and watch the game, or to extend the feel good factor in the town. I mean, I'm living in Sheffield at the moment, and the mood in the city, given the challenges that we're having at Sheffield Wednesday and the perhaps challenges at Sheffield United, just dampen the mood of swathes of the community. And I think that's often missed when we talk about private equity, venture capital, promotion, relegation, people making money, and so on and so forth. Actually, this has a real impact on the lives of people.
Yeah, when Rob and Ryan bought Wrexham, and we had the conversation about what do you want to achieve, success on the pitch is an easy answer. Because everybody involved in football wants to be successful. Wants to be successful on the pitch. But the real answer wasn't a financial return on investment. That wasn't the motivation. It might be the end result, but it wasn't the motivation in the first part. The first place was to deliver benefit to a local community that had long been looked over, was down on its luck, was from a working class area. The Wrexham story would never have worked in one of the suburbs around London. Mm-hmm. It had to be that working class area. But in the UK and football and finance and the business reporters around football, we've got this really unhelpful way of doing things where we want to try and convert everything into a financial metric. Okay, everything's got to be measured. It's the one thing that we all believe genuinely you can compare. And my view of it is the self-esteem that's being generated in Wrexham through the success of the football club, and then the profile that success through the documentary has created, is worth far more than any amount of financial return. Because you've got people who are waking up in a morning proud to say they're from Wrexham now. Now, that's not happened before. So don't anybody try and put a financial value on that. Because actually, putting a financial value on it destroys it. What you've got to do is ask the people of the town, how do you feel as a result of this? And if somebody now says, yes, I'm happy, I'm from Wrexham, rather than I'm from North Wales, or, God forbid, I'm from a town near Chester, then, you can see the real positive impact that's been made. We've seen loads of examples of, I was going nowhere, I was struggling, but this has given me some belief. It's been great. Well, for me, that's keep your P&L and your balance sheet. If the motivation of the football club is to do the right thing and benefit the community, let's try and create another measure that doesn't put the spotlight on pound, shilling, and pence.
Yeah. Do you think that feel good factor could propel Wrexham into the Premier League?
I don't think the goodwill factor in itself propels you into the Premier League. I mean, you've got to get the business right on the pitch. I mean, the goodwill factor and the self-esteem element is the byproduct of the football club doing well.
Yeah.
And actually, that then creates a multiplier that just doesn't exist in most towns. As Rob said, you don't have that multiplier in Sheffield at this moment in time. Yet in Wrexham you do. And I genuinely think it's a sort of advantage that a single city club or a single town club has the advantage of, because there isn't a divide. But generally, a unified community and club gives you the best chance of success. I mean, another example I use is when you look at who actually owns a football club. The reality is that a football club is owned by the community. Whether that's the fans that go through the turnstiles or whatever the definition of community is, but that's where its heart and soul lives. Because we know that if those fans don't turn up, that football club ceases to exist in one form or another. What the equity owners own is the ability to play in any one division at any particular time. The Abu Dhabi group that own Manchester City own the right to play in the Premier League.
Yep.
The owners of Tranmere Rovers own the right to play in League Two. So that's how I split between ownership. One owns the right to play in a division, the other one is the football club itself. But to be successful, both have got a joint responsibility to make sure that you make the absolute best of the opportunity that both of you have to maximise the effectiveness of that football club in its local community.
Well, it's an amazing story. It's great to be a part of. Have you been on camera, Shaun, a lot? Are you happy in front of the?
I've been in front of the cameras a fair bit. Is it something that comes naturally? Absolutely not. As you would have known if you could have seen me thinking, hang on a minute, this podcast might actually not just be recorded, I might actually use the images from it as well, so I better go and find a shirt to wear. Do you think, given the increase in US owners in the EFL, these are smart people, these are people who know how to monetize football and monetize entertainment. Do you think it's realistic to imagine that one day in the not too distant future we might be seeing a fixture in the Championship or League One or League Two being played in another country, i.e. America? So here we go. I don't think it'll ever happen. Not a league game.
Okay.
I could see a Carabao. I could see a cup game going overseas.
Yeah.
And I think I'd actually support that.
Yeah.
Because it'd be expanding the brand of the club. But the principle of league football is you play everybody home and away. There are a few examples, but generally all 23 home games should be played on the same ground.
Yeah.
And as a visiting club, you visit the 23 clubs that you come to play you. That's obviously EFL. It's 38 in 38 in the Premier League. And if everything I've just talked about for 5 minutes about clubs taking the name from the local community,
yeah,
then if you start taking league games away from that local community, surely you're beginning to erode the very thing you're celebrating is its strength.
Yeah.
So
there's something. Yeah, carry on, Shaun. Sorry.
No, I was going to say I could see a cup game. I mean, whilst I was at the EFL at one stage, we looked at could we give clubs the opportunity, to go and play the first round of the Carabao, bring it pre-season, And could you give them the opportunity to go and play a game overseas? Now, obviously, Carabao being a Thai drinks brand were so there was an opportunity. But if you look at where owners are from, if an overseas owner wants to grow the brand of their football club in the domestic market, where they originate from, why wouldn't? And I'm using old examples here. Nottingham Forest be able to play their Carabao Cup first round game in Kuwait at the time, or if you had a Thai owner go to Thailand, or an American owner go to America. Why not? You're building the brand of the club, but you're not building it at the expense of the strength of the domestic competition.
Yep.
That we all applaud and want to keep in place.
That's a really important point. Because you look at the way the American franchise model works, and people will always say to me, well, surely it's inevitable because the NFL have come over to the UK. They've got a base. They've played at Wembley. They've played at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. I think the NBA have been over in Germany for a bit. But they are all franchises. So culturally, they can be picked up and moved and ported around. Whereas, again, going back to the points you were making on the philanthropy and the community engagement and the importance of that, actually removing a part of that jigsaw from the community and moving it elsewhere, and culturally doesn't feel right. But a cup game might work, and to extend that, it could also help enhance the brand of the leagues themselves and protect the player welfare, because you wouldn't necessarily have to keep doing all these big elongated pre-season tours, particularly up in the Premier League, if you've got some competitive fixtures that are due to be booked elsewhere. We've always settled, Shaun, on the Community Shield, but I feel like that's a little bit contrite, having just gone through that community engagement piece with you, and the Community Shield being all about the communities of the clubs that exist in and around there.
Wait, I mean, it went from Charity Shield to
Charity Shield, yeah,
because they decided they needed to change the distribution model so it didn't have to be charity.
Yeah.
I mean, but of course that's a one-off game, isn't it? And the problem with that one-off game is that you don't know who's going to be playing in it till the end of the season, and those clubs have already got pre-season tours, love them or hate them, arranged and in place. So why don't if you did do something with the EFL Cup early rounds and look at a sensible schedule and date, because who's going to be playing in the EFL Cup first round at the end of the football season.
Mm-hmm.
So why? So you could do you've got plenty of lead up time, and of course it wouldn't be mandatory. It would be completely optional.
Yeah. Finally, Shaun, just one more important matter of state. Would you like to see football fans being able to drink beer in the stands watching a game?
Absolutely, and in exactly the same way as I'd like them a bit of stand up as well. Yeah. Probably not doing should they be doing both at the same time? That could be an interesting conundrum. But ultimately, the legislation was a solution to a particular problem at the time. Do I genuinely think that any of the much reduced issues of violence around football are drink related now? I suspect they're not. And if there are, they're probably created by people binge drinking before they actually get to the football stadium.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? You could argue that it's far more sensible allowing people to pace their drinking as opposed to saying, right, you've got 15 minutes to get as many pints down you as possible at half time, then you go back to the stands, or you've got X number of minutes before kick-off.
But Rich, it has other benefits as well. You get somebody get people into a stadium after 90 minutes earlier. There's less people outside that stadium to get caught up in any issues that may exist. Yeah. The number of issues you see inside stadiums now are few and far between. There's isolated issues, but I'm not so sure they're necessarily alcohol related.
No.
So I'd be advocating a return to drinking. but in my time at Bradford, we had Bradford Bulls, the rugby league team, playing there for a couple of years, and I know Ian Lenigan, at Wigan, used to always tell me, there's families that have season tickets in the same seats for both rugby and football. They go to the football on a Saturday and can't drink in that seat. Yet they go to the rugby on a Sunday and can drink in exactly the same seat, in exactly the same place, in exactly the same facilities, and all that's different is the game that's being played on the pitch.
Yeah.
Discuss.
Kind of nonsensical, isn't it?
There's a lot of evolution, isn't there, to happen, and actually to come through to the central component of what we've talked about, and the point of what Rich and I are trying to do with regard to kind of unpacking the business of sport. This bigger idea about sport being an entertainment product, the things that you're doing at Wrexham that really capitalise on that entertainment value to help the community, actually comes back to that point about having a beer, doesn't it? It's can you deliver an entertainment product that actually is longer than just 90 minutes, because you can get fans in a couple of hours before, a couple of hours after. We've seen what happens with rugby union, and it typically works quite well.
But moving on to football's more sport in general, but we're talking about football here. It's more important to society than that. I mean, how many times have people said, "Oh, I've got to go and see my parents," or "I need to go and see my uncle," and it's this, I've got to go and this big sigh, I've got to go and do it. Yet, if they go to the football together, there's 23 appointments to view. Appointments to meet every single year, and you're actually doing it in an environment together where everybody wants to be there. So I actually think spectator sport keeps family groups together on a far more regular basis, because it's easy. Well, I'll see my dad at the football on Saturday, or I'll see my mum, or I'll see my sister, or I know they've got tickets 3 or 4 rows back. I'll have a word with them on Saturday when I'm there. It creates a level of social engagement way beyond that any other part of society allows us to benefit from. If you've got a season ticket and you've been sat in the same sort of group of 10 people, you probably never even knew each other when you started.
Yeah.
But the reality is you probably know more about that person and what they're doing, and you can guarantee if they don't turn up for 2 weeks, somebody's asking the question, are they all right?
Yeah. Where are they?
What does that? What other sort of sport? Well, that's what sport and spectator products do. Brings people together from different parts with one common interest.
Yeah,
and we've got to
massive.
We've got to maximise
in mental health terms as well. You can see the lift that going to football on a Saturday afternoon, or my dad spends a lot of time watching county cricket during the summer, and he comes home and there's an energy that generates.
But Rich, the answer is everybody's equal when they go through the turnstiles.
Yeah.
Everybody's equal. Listen, unless you're in one of those weird and wonderful situations, the bottom line is the person sat in the seat next to you is paid exactly the same as you.
Yeah.
And it's a classless system. But it allows people to have conversations about things that they would never do, or different demographic groups actually mixing together in a place they want to be. And this is why I've long advocated that government genuinely needs to look at sport in that really positive way and what it can bring. Not it's a drain on resource, or public service can't support it. Ultimately, when a football match is on at 3:00, there's a group of people in 46 stadiums up and down the country. Everybody knows where they are. Everybody knows what they're doing, and ultimately, it's an event to be celebrated.
Yep. Well, that seems like an extremely positive place to finish. Shaun, thank you very much for your time this morning. Lovely to speak to you and get your views, and I hope you get a chance to relax during the summer. Are you going away, or is that out the window?
I ran out as soon as the season finished to I thought during the periods of celebrations, and I thought that's the time to get away before you wake up in the morning, the reality hits you that here we go again. We've just made next year a hell of a lot harder.
Excellent. Thank you, Shaun. Thanks, Rob.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye. Bye.